Have you ever looked in the mirror and whispered to yourself, I don't know who I am anymore? You're not alone. For many women, turning 35 marks an invisible threshold, a quiet inner shift that no one warns you about. The goals you once chased no longer satisfy you. The roles you've mastered, mother, partner, achiever, caretaker, begin to feel like costumes. And beneath it all, there's a question rising from the depths. Who am I, if I'm not who I've always been? This isn't failure, this is transformation. And Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the inner life with more depth than anyone before or since, believed that true self-discovery doesn't begin in youth, it begins in midlife. In your late 30s and beyond, your soul begins to stir. And if you listen, if you dare to follow its whispers, it will lead you to your truest self. What you're about to learn could change the way you see yourself forever. So stay with me, because the second half of your life isn't about surviving, it's about becoming. Part 1. The silence after success. Why accomplishment feels empty after 35. She had everything she was told to want. A successful career, a loving partner, 2 children, a house full of memories and mortgage payments. Yet on a cold Tuesday morning, while stirring her coffee in silence, something inside her broke. Why do I feel so empty? That question echoed like a distant bell inside her. Not depression exactly, not sadness, just a numb, heavy silence where ambition used to be. This moment, this subtle collapse of the inner scaffolding, is far more common than we admit, especially for women over 35. And Carl Jung would argue it's not only expected, it's necessary. Thoroughly unprepared, we take the step into the afternoon of life. Worse still, we take this step with the false presupposition that our truths and ideals will serve us as hitherto. Carl Jung. You see, the first half of life is about building identity, persona, reputation, achievements, all the things we wear to be seen, validated, loved. But around midlife, a strange thing happens. The persona starts to crack. And here's the paradox. What we worked so hard to become begins to feel like a mask. The persona problem. Jung called the persona the social face we show the world. It's not false, but it's incomplete. It's the version of you that plays by the rules. The capable you, the polite you, the one that says, I'm fine, even when you're not. And for women, the persona often becomes exhaustingly overachieving. You become everything to everyone. The dependable daughter, the supportive wife, the team player, the emotional manager of the family. But eventually, the soul revolts. Not loudly, it whispers, this isn't who I really am. The more you succeed at playing your role, the more disconnected you may feel from your essence. That's why so many women wake up at 37, 42, or 49 and feel like strangers to themselves. They're not broken, they're awakening. When numbness is a spiritual clue, numbness, boredom, restlessness, these aren't signs of dysfunction. In Jungian terms, they're soul signals. Your psyche is inviting you inward to begin a deeper journey. But this invitation is terrifying because it asks you to question everything you've built. What if I'm not the career woman anymore? What if I don't want to be the caregiver? What if my marriage is built on a version of me that no longer exists? These are not easy questions. They threaten your entire identity. But Jung taught that midlife is not about answers. It's about letting the old questions die so that new soul-aligned questions can emerge. Death of the old self. There's a myth Jung often referred to, the story of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess who descends into the underworld. At each gate, she must give up a piece of her royal identity, her crown, her necklace, her robe. By the time she reaches the depths, she is naked and unrecognizable. This is the journey of the midlife woman. You must surrender what once defined you, not because it was wrong, but because it is done. That silent coffee moment, that feeling of what now, it's the first gate. We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. Jung. So what do you do? First, you listen, not with your ears, but with your soul. Notice the things that no longer fit, the obligations that drain you, the roles you've outgrown, the relationships that feel more like performances than presence. Then make space, let yourself not know who you are for a while. Let the mask loosen, let the silence speak. Midlife isn't a crisis, it's a rite of passage. And that emptiness you feel, it's not the absence of meaning, it's the clearing for something more real. But let me ask you this. What if the woman you were always meant to be is hidden behind everything you've been told to be? Stay with me, because in the next chapter we'll explore a truth almost every woman forgets. You can't find yourself by doing more. You find yourself by listening to the forgotten feminine within. Part 2, The Forgotten Feminine, Reconnecting with the Soul of a Woman. There comes a point in a woman's life, often quietly, subtly, and without a clear cause, when she begins to feel estranged from herself, not because she's lost her mind, but because she's lost her soul. This moment doesn't always arrive in dramatic fashion. Sometimes it's as mundane as sitting in traffic, realizing the music she once loved now feels foreign, or walking through a store, surrounded by things she once desired, only to feel indifferent. It's the echo of a voice long suppressed, the feminine within, calling to be remembered. Carl Jung believed that every woman carries within her an inner image, a living symbol of the anima or soul. While Jung primarily described the anima as a man's inner feminine, for women this image becomes something even more sacred, the mirror of her unlived depths, her forgotten instincts, her suppressed emotional truths. Over time, society's expectations of what a woman should be, rational, organized, maternal, self-sacrificing, eclipse her connection to these deep reservoirs. She becomes hyper-competent, ever-reliable, and often emotionally barren, not because she lacks feeling, but because she's been forced to live from her head, not her heart. And then the cracks begin to show. She starts questioning why she no longer cries at movies, why laughter feels hollow, why sex feels like a task, why even joy has become performance. These are not the symptoms of burnout. They are the soul's rebellion against a life lived in half-light. The feminine, the true feminine, is not just about softness or beauty. It is intuition, it is chaos, it is sacred rage, stillness, sensuality, and knowing. It is the part of her that dances without needing permission, that creates without needing validation. But for many women over 35, this part was buried under layers of achievement, mothering, and emotional labor. Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." The forgotten feminine is not outside of you. She lives in your dreams, your cravings, your strange impulses to paint again, to sing off-key in the kitchen, to be touched without agenda. She shows up when you stop pretending. She returns when you finally say, "I don't know what I want anymore, but I know it's not this." There's a story I heard, a woman in her 40s who hadn't painted in 20 years. One evening, after an exhausting argument with her teenage daughter and a silent dinner with her husband, she walked into the garage and found her old brushes. She sat on the cold floor, opened a forgotten box of acrylics, and began to smear color across a torn piece of cardboard. No plan, no purpose, just instinct. She wept the entire time, not out of sadness, but relief. "For the first time in years," she said, "I felt like myself again." This is the soul returning, not through logic or achievement, but through the irrational symbolic language of the feminine. The modern world doesn't make space for this, for sacred idleness, for sensuality without outcome, for feelings without solution. Women are taught to be productive, not whole. But the feminine doesn't thrive in schedules and spreadsheets. She thrives in ritual, nature, tears, dance, and dreams. And when she's ignored, she withers, and so does the woman. The path forward is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering someone ancient. the woman you were before the world told you who to be, and you'll find her not by striving, but by softening, not by adding more to your plate, but by creating space for silence. You'll find her in the long walks with no destination, in the refusal to explain your tears, in the sudden urge to write poetry or lie naked under the stars. You'll find her in dreams of water, of animals, of lovers you've never met but somehow know. Jung taught that the psyche speaks in symbols, and when a woman ignores her inner life, those symbols begin to erupt as symptoms: anxiety, depression, dissociation. But these aren't enemies, they are messengers. And what they're saying is simple: come back to yourself. So ask yourself now, what part of me have I abandoned to become who I thought I needed to be? What quiet urges have I silenced for the sake of being good, useful, or safe? What would happen if I stopped performing and simply began to feel again? Stay with me, because in the next chapter we'll walk into the shadows, the parts of you that you've hidden, denied, or repressed, and why they hold the key to your true power. Part 3. The midlife mirror, confronting the shadow you've hidden for years. There is a moment, often sudden, sometimes gradual, when a woman over 35 catches her own reflection, not just in a mirror, but in a reaction, a flash of jealousy toward a younger colleague, a resentment that erupts after years of swallowing her needs, a cold withdrawal from her partner that she can no longer explain away. It's not pretty, it's not noble, and it doesn't fit the story she tells about herself, but it's real, raw, and deeply revealing. This is the shadow, and it's knocking at the door. Carl Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The shadow is everything within us we've been taught to disown: our anger, our selfishness, our ambition, our lust, our grief. Not because these things are inherently bad, but because at some point we learned they were unacceptable. And so we tucked them away. We became nice instead of authentic. We smiled instead of screamed. We became the good girl, the accommodating wife, the always available friend. And in doing so, we banished parts of our psyche to the basement of our being. But midlife doesn't tolerate inauthenticity. The mask begins to crack, and the parts of you that were exiled, they start to rise. Sometimes it shows up as irritability, sometimes as unexplained sadness, sometimes as an affair, a breakdown, or a confession. It's terrifying because it threatens everything you thought you were. But this is the hidden gift. The shadow doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to free you, to make you whole. And the only way out is through. There was a woman I worked with, a gentle, nurturing teacher in her 40s, who began having violent dreams. She dreamed of pushing people, breaking glass, screaming at strangers. It horrified her. She said, "That's not me." But as we explored further, a truth emerged. She had spent decades suppressing her own anger to be liked, to be seen as good. Her dreams weren't random. They were the psyche's desperate attempt to integrate the power she had repressed. Once she allowed herself to feel her rage, to journal it, to move it through her body, not act on it destructively, but own it, she felt liberated. "I feel more alive," she whispered, "less fake." This is the paradox. The shadow holds your vitality. The parts you judge as ugly are often the very parts that hold your passion, your boundaries, your voice. And for women, this often includes ambition. We're taught to downplay our desires, to stay small, to be accommodating. But the truth is, buried inside the shadow is a woman who knows what she wants and isn't afraid to claim it. Jung believed that the shadow, when integrated, becomes a source of creativity, energy, and inner authority. But it requires courage. It means owning that, yes, sometimes you're jealous, sometimes you resent your kids, sometimes you fantasize about running away, sometimes you hate the life you worked so hard to build. These aren't sins, they're signals. They tell you where you've abandoned yourself. Midlife isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough, but only if you're willing to look, and not just look, but feel. to allow your body to tremble with the rage you weren't allowed to express at 16, to grieve the years you lost to people pleasing, to forgive yourself for not knowing better. There's no map for this, only mirrors. You will see yourself reflected in others, in the friend who triggers you, the colleague who intimidates you, the stranger whose presence feels electric. Every irritation, every envy, every resistance is an invitation. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The shadow is sneaky. It hides in judgment, in gossip, in comparison. But if you trace the thread, if you ask, what am I projecting? What part of me have I disowned that she's now carrying for me? You'll find the key. Because the shadow is not your enemy. It's your exiled genius, your truth teller, your boundary maker, your protector. It doesn't want to ruin your life. It wants to restore it. So ask yourself, what parts of me have I labeled as wrong, but secretly admire in others? What feelings do I deny because I'm afraid they'll make me unlovable? This is the work of wholeness, not perfection. Wholeness, where you can hold both light and dark, love and anger, grace and grit. Stay with me, because in the next chapter we'll go even deeper into your relationships, into the ways we project our unlived selves onto others, and how reclaiming that projection can lead to a love that is rooted in reality, not fantasy. Part 4, Love Beyond Projection, Seeing Partners and Friends as They Truly Are. Somewhere in your 30s or 40s, you may look at your partner, the one you chose, built a life with, shared a bed with for years, and ask yourself a question so dangerous you barely whisper it. Do I even know this person? But what's more unsettling is the question that follows. Do they truly know me? This quiet rupture isn't necessarily about conflict, infidelity, or loss of attraction. It's something deeper, subtler. It's the crumbling of projection, one of the most powerful forces in human psychology, and one that Carl Jung studied with piercing clarity. Projection is the unconscious act of placing parts of yourself, both light and shadow, onto another person. We don't fall in love with people as they are. We fall in love with the image they carry for us. The man who seemed endlessly attentive wasn't just a person. He was your projection of being seen. The friend who made you laugh through your pain didn't just support you. She carried your disowned joy. And when these projections start to fade, we feel betrayed, not by them, but by the unconscious fantasy they once fulfilled. Jung said, when we see men or women in a certain way and react to them accordingly, we may be sure we are projecting our own unacknowledged traits upon them. In midlife, these projections begin to fall apart. The unconscious energy that once idealized others now demands to be reclaimed. That's why the same partner who once made you feel safe might now feel suffocating. The friend who once inspired you might now trigger you. The job you once adored might feel meaningless. It's not because the world changed, it's because you did. Your soul is asking for depth, for honesty, for connection without illusion. For women over 35, this often surfaces as a deep ache in relationships, a sense that something's missing, a longing for conversations that go beyond logistics and dinner plans, a frustration that your emotional world feels invisible. And yet, when you try to speak it, you feel guilty, ungrateful, as if your yearning itself is betrayal. But what you're really yearning for is resonance, a soul-to-soul connection. And that cannot happen while you're still living through projections. There's a story I remember vividly, and a woman who came to therapy not because her marriage was broken, but because it felt hollow. Her husband was kind, responsible, a good man, but she felt unseen. As we unpacked her story, it became clear she had projected her need for emotional depth, spiritual intimacy, and inner exploration onto other relationships, friends, books, even dreams. Her husband wasn't the villain. He just wasn't carrying her anima anymore, her inner image of what she needed to meet in herself. When we remove projection, we see people as they are, not as we need them to be, and that's painful because it means letting go of fantasies. But it's also liberating because it opens the door to real love, not based on illusions, but on truth. Jung believed that love isn't about merging. It's about encountering the other as a soul, mysterious, separate, whole. And to do that, we must first reclaim our own projections, own our need for adventure, our longing for depth, our craving for beauty and chaos and intimacy. So how do you begin this reclamation? Start by noticing your emotional spikes. Who do you idealize? Who do you demonize? Who makes you feel not enough? These are clues. If you're endlessly drawn to charismatic people, perhaps you've disowned your own creativity. If you're repelled by assertive women, maybe you've buried your own power. Every trigger is a mirror. Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is your chance to interrupt that fate, to stop blaming others for not fulfilling a role they never agreed to play, to take back your longing and live it yourself. And when you do, when you stop outsourcing your aliveness, everything shifts. Your relationships deepen, not because others change, but because you do. You stop demanding, you start connecting, you move from fantasy into presence, and in that presence, real love is possible. So now, ask yourself, who am I secretly asking to carry the parts of me I've disowned? And what would happen if I took them back? Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll explore one of the most powerful and unspoken influences on your inner life, the mother complex, and how breaking free from her voice may be the key to your liberation. Part 5, the mother complex and the quest for inner authority. There's a voice inside many women over 35 that whispers in moments of hesitation, guilt, or daring. That's not what a good woman does. It's subtle, but insistent. When you decline a favor, when you express a boundary, when you choose yourself, that voice tightens. It might sound like your actual mother, or maybe just a feeling you can't name, a presence lingering beneath every decision. Jung called this deeply embedded inner voice the mother complex, and until you confront it, you will never truly hear your own. For many women, especially those raised to please, nurture, and maintain harmony, the mother complex becomes a psychological blueprint, the inherited beliefs about what a woman should be. She should be selfless, she should smile, she should not be too angry, too loud, too ambitious. These beliefs aren't always spoken, they're absorbed through looks, through praise withheld, through the way your mother treated herself. And whether your relationship with her was warm or wounded, her image lives inside you, not just as memory, but as an active psychic force shaping your choices. Jung described complexes as feeling-toned groups of ideas, emotional patterns that operate outside our conscious will. And the mother complex is one of the most potent. It manifests in guilt when you rest, in shame when you shine, in fear when you dare to say no, it's not your fault. This complex was born in a society that has idealized female sacrifice while silencing female sovereignty. And so, even when you try to live differently, that inner voice, that maternal ghost, tries to pull you back into compliance. There's a woman I once worked with, 38 years old, who had just left her corporate job to pursue her dream of writing. She was financially stable, emotionally prepared, spiritually hungry, and yet every morning she woke with a heaviness in her chest. I feel like I'm doing something wrong, she said. As we unraveled it, the truth emerged. Her mother had spent her life being the responsible one. She worked jobs she hated, endured silence for the sake of survival, and carried the weight of the family. Now, watching her daughter choose joy, that old story was being threatened, not out of malice, but out of fear. If I didn't get to live freely, her mother's shadow whispered, how dare you? This is the tragedy and the power of the mother complex. It binds us to generations of unlived lives. Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." And many women carry their mother's unlived passions like a secret debt. They shrink so she won't feel small. They struggle so she won't feel alone. They succeed, but only just enough so she won't feel left behind. But here's the truth. You do not owe your mother your silence. You do not owe her your suffering. What you owe her and yourself is truth. And truth begins with listening to your own inner authority. The wise woman within you who doesn't speak in shoulds, but in knowing. She doesn't guilt, she guides. She doesn't demand sacrifice, she invites wholeness. To awaken her, you must first meet the mother inside, not just as memory, but as symbol. Journal her voice, speak to her, ask, what do you want from me? What are you protecting me from? What are you afraid I'll become? These questions aren't meant to accuse, but to illuminate, because once you understand the voice, you can choose, is this mine or hers? And if it's hers, you bless it and let it go. This doesn't mean rejecting your actual mother. It means disentangling from her psyche. It means growing into a woman who can say, thank you for the life you gave me. Now I must live it in my own way. Only then can you step into the fullness of your authority. Not authority that shouts or dominates, but authority that knows, that trusts your timing, your needs, your wisdom. This is not rebellion, this is individuation. The process Jung described as becoming who you truly are, not who you were told to be. So ask yourself now, where in my life am I still obeying an inner mother? Where do I still seek her approval, avoid her judgment, fear her rejection? Because until you answer those questions, you will never truly belong to yourself. Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll leave the realm of intellect and enter the domain of symbols, your dreams, the secret language of the soul that's been whispering to you in sleep, waiting to be heard. Part 6, Dreams and Symbols. Your soul is speaking to you. Every night, whether you remember them or not, your soul writes stories in the dark, stories of falling, of flying, of strange houses and old lovers, of floods and reunions and inexplicable sorrow. These are not random. These are not just the mind processing the day. In Jung's view, these are sacred messages, the language of the unconscious speaking directly to you. And for women over 35, as life begins to shift internally and externally, your dreams often become more vivid, more strange, and more persistent, because when the outer world no longer reflects who you are becoming, the inner world rushes forward to guide you. Jung called dreams the royal road to the unconscious, a portal to the deeper layers of the psyche. They are symbolic expressions of truths we cannot yet face by day. The house you keep dreaming of, that's the architecture of your inner self. The recurring water, the emotional life you've been avoiding, the faceless man, the animus, your inner masculine asking to be integrated. Dreams speak in metaphors because the soul does not use logic. It uses image, emotion, pattern. And when you learn to listen, really listen, something astonishing happens. You begin to feel known even by yourself. Take, for example, the woman who dreamed of her childhood home flooding. Night after night, the same dream. At first, she dismissed it as stress, but when she brought it into conscious reflection, it began to unfold. The house represented her inner foundation, the flood, the emotional overwhelm she'd suppressed for years. She hadn't cried in months, hadn't allowed herself to grieve her divorce, hadn't acknowledged the fear of starting over. The dream wasn't trying to scare her, it was trying to free her. It said, let it come, let it wash through. You're strong enough now. Women in midlife often report more symbolic dreams of death and rebirth, of crossing bridges, of meeting wise women or threatening animals. These are not arbitrary. They are expressions of individuation, the deep psychic process of becoming whole. Jung wrote, "The dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul. And once you step through that door, you enter the realm of meaning, of inner guidance, of healing that doesn't come from advice, but from alignment. You don't need to be an expert to understand your dreams. You only need to approach them with reverence and curiosity. When you wake, write them down, even fragments, even a single image. Then ask, what might this symbol mean for me right now? What part of myself does this figure represent? There are no fixed answers. Dream work is not interpretation, it's dialogue. Active imagination, as Jung called it, is a method of engaging these dream images directly. Speak to them, ask them why they've come, imagine their voice, trust what arises. And this is the most beautiful part. The more you listen to your dreams, the more alive you become, because your unconscious realizes she's paying attention. And when that happens, a bridge is built between the known and the unknown, between the persona and the soul, between the woman you've been and the woman you're becoming. I once met a woman in her 40s who dreamed of a wolf following her. At first, she was terrified. Every night, the wolf chased her. But one night, she turned around and the wolf stopped. He looked at her, eyes deep and still. She approached, and he bowed his head. She woke up crying. He wasn't there to harm me, she said. He was there to protect something wild in me I forgot I had. That's what dreams do. They bring back your instinct, your truth, your wildness. So now ask yourself, what images return to me in the night? What stories is my soul trying to tell? And what would happen if I truly began to listen? Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll walk through the fire of transformation itself, the alchemical process of turning your midlife chaos into something radiant and powerful, into gold. Part 7, Alchemy of the Self, turning midlife crisis into inner gold. There's a moment, and if you're here, you've likely felt it, when everything you've built, everything you believed you were, begins to dissolve. The routines you once relied on lose their meaning. The people you served without question now feel distant. Your desires shift, your values crack open, and your identity begins to disintegrate. From the outside, it might look like a crisis, but Carl Jung would tell you it's something far more sacred. You are not falling apart, you are entering the alchemical fire. Alchemy, the ancient spiritual science of transforming base metals into gold, was one of Jung's deepest fascinations. But he wasn't interested in it as chemistry. He saw it as metaphor for psychological transformation. In Jungian terms, midlife is the great alchemical furnace. It is where the false gold of persona melts, where illusions burn, where the soul demands authenticity, even if it costs you everything. This process is not comfortable, it is not quick, but it is holy. The alchemists describe three main stages: nigredo, albedo, and rubedo. First comes nigredo, the blackening, the dark night. This is when your life no longer fits, when grief and confusion cloud everything. You feel lost, raw, undone. But this darkness is not failure, it is the necessary decay of the old self. In nigredo, the soul begins to speak in strange ways, through dreams, through illness, through a sudden inability to keep going as you were. Many women over 35 find themselves here, not knowing they are standing at the threshold of the sacred. Then comes albedo, the whitening, illumination, insight. It often comes quietly, a moment of clarity in the midst of despair, a sentence in a book that makes you cry, a walk in nature where everything suddenly makes sense. This is when you begin to see your patterns, your wounds, your projections, not with judgment, but with compassion. You start to reclaim pieces of yourself, the wild girl who once loved to dance, the woman who yearns for silence, the part of you that longs to create without apology. These moments are golden threads woven into your transformation. Finally, rubedo, the reddening, integration, the emergence of a new self, not someone better, someone truer. You are no longer performing for approval. You no longer sacrifice your needs on the altar of others' comfort. You no longer abandon yourself to avoid being abandoned. You become whole, not because you fixed yourself, but because you embraced yourself. Shadow and light, grief and joy, power and vulnerability. I remember a woman in her late 40s who told me, "I spent the first half of my life becoming who I was supposed to be. Now I'm becoming who I actually am." She had lost her job, left her marriage, and moved into a tiny home by the sea. From the outside, it looked like collapse, but she radiated, "I finally feel like I'm living my life, not someone else's idea of it." This is the gold Jung spoke of, not external success, but internal sovereignty. The kind of radiance that comes when a woman owns her story, her wounds, her wisdom, the kind of beauty that cannot be bought because it is forged in fire. And that fire, it's not here to destroy you, it's here to purify you. So if you feel like you're falling apart, ask yourself, what part of me is dying? And what part of me is being born? What mask am I finally ready to burn? What truth am I brave enough to live? Because the truth is this: midlife isn't your undoing, it's your rebirth. Stay with me, because in the next part, we will explore the power of chosen solitude and how sacred loneliness can become the womb for your deepest transformation. Part 8, Sacred Loneliness. Why solitude in your late 30s and 40s is a gift. There's a kind of loneliness that strikes in midlife, a quiet ache that follows you through crowded rooms and busy routines. You can be surrounded by people, yet feel unseen. You can be loved, yet untouched in your core. It isn't the loneliness of isolation, it's the loneliness of disconnection from your essence, from your truth, from the life you were meant to live. And while everything in modern life urges you to numb it with noise, with screens, with productivity, Carl Jung would ask you to turn toward it. He called this stage of life a return to the self, the deeper center of your being. And like any sacred return, it often begins in solitude. Not because you're broken, but because something within you is finally asking to be heard without interruption. Jung wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." And what becomes important in midlife is not small talk or surface roles, it's meaning, it's depth, it's the whispered voice within you that's been waiting decades for your full attention. For women over 35, solitude can feel both terrifying and magnetic. After years of being everything to everyone, the silence of being alone can feel like a void. But in truth, it's not a void. It's a womb, a space of gestation, a temple where your soul begins to remember who she is when no one else is watching. This is not the loneliness of abandonment, it's the sacred aloneness of becoming. There was a woman I met, 44 years old, recently divorced, kids off to college. She sat across from me and whispered, "I don't know what to do with all this quiet." She had spent 2 decades filling her life with purpose, raising children, supporting a partner, climbing the ladder, and now there was no one to take care of but herself. At first, she panicked, bought new furniture, started online dating, kept busy, but eventually exhaustion took over. One night, she sat by the window, wine in hand, and cried, not from sadness, but from the realization, I've never really been alone with myself. And then, slowly, something softened. She began taking long walks, reading poetry, journaling dreams. She started having conversations not with others, but with her own inner life. That silence she once feared, it became her sanctuary. She told me, "For the first time, I feel like I'm not performing." That is the gift of sacred loneliness, the end of performance and the beginning of presence. But to embrace this gift, you must resist the pull to fill the void too quickly. This is the temptation, to rush into new roles, new relationships, new projects, because stillness feels unproductive. But your soul is not a machine. She doesn't want to be fixed. She wants to be felt. She wants you to lie on the floor and breathe, to let the grief come, to let the numbness thaw, to listen not for answers, but for the subtle rhythm of your own becoming. Jung practiced what he called active imagination, a way of engaging with the unconscious through dialogue, art, and silence. In your solitude, you can do the same. Light a candle, ask a question, then listen. What image arises? What sensation in your body? What memory surfaces? This is your inner life speaking. This is you becoming whole. Because here's the truth. The most important relationship you will ever have is not with your partner, your children, or your friends. It's with yourself, and midlife is when that relationship either deepens or disappears. So ask yourself, when was the last time I sat in stillness without trying to fix, prove, or plan? What is waiting for me in the quiet I've been avoiding? Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we'll step into the fierce grace of boundaries, of saying no, of choosing authenticity over approval, because your power begins the moment you stop shrinking to make others comfortable. Part 9, authenticity over approval, the power of saying no. There comes a point in every woman's life, often after years of being agreeable, accommodating, and endlessly available, when the word no rises from within like a prayer. Not as rebellion, but as revelation. It isn't loud at first. It's a whisper in your chest when someone asks for too much, a tightening in your throat when you agree out of habit, not desire, a flicker of truth behind your smile. This is not bitterness, it's not selfishness. This is the soul reclaiming her boundaries, and with it, her authenticity. Carl Jung knew that individuation and the process of becoming who you truly are could not happen without confrontation. Confrontation with the roles you've played, with the parts of yourself you've abandoned, and most of all, with the systems of approval that once defined your worth. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But to claim that privilege, you must risk being misunderstood. You must be willing to disappoint others in order to stop disappointing yourself." For women over 35, the weight of approval can become unbearable. You've spent decades being the good one. You were praised for your helpfulness, rewarded for your self-sacrifice. You learned to read a room before you entered it, shapeshifted, smiled, said what was expected, and somewhere along the way, you stopped asking what you needed, because somewhere along the way, needing became dangerous. But now, the cost is too high. The body starts to speak, in fatigue, in tension, in symptoms no doctor can fully explain. The heart feels heavy. The soul whispers, enough. This is the moment of power, not the kind you were taught to admire, not the kind that dominates or performs. This is quiet power, the power of a woman who no longer needs to be liked, to be real. There was a woman I knew, always the caretaker, always the peacemaker. She was loved by everyone and exhausted by it. She never said no, not to her siblings, not to her boss, not even to strangers. One day, she stood in a grocery store line as a stranger cut in front of her, and something broke. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she just stepped back, left her cart, and walked out. That evening, she sat in her car for an hour, hands shaking. "I don't know who I am when I'm not saying yes," she whispered. That was her turning point. She started practicing tiny no's. No to overcommitting, no to toxic family dynamics, no to social events that drained her. It wasn't easy. She lost people. She faced guilt. But in that space, something else emerged, herself. She started painting again. She started saying what she actually thought. She laughed more. She cried more. And she began to feel whole. Jung believed that boundaries are not walls. They are containers. They are the structure within which the soul can thrive. And saying no is not rejection of others. It's devotion to self. The more you say no to what violates your truth, the more space you create for what nourishes it. This is not about becoming cold or distant. It's about becoming clear. If you've been the fixer, the helper, the one who holds it all together, hear this. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to stop explaining. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to choose a life that reflects your inner truth, not just your outer obligations. So ask yourself, where in my life am I still shrinking to stay safe? Who am I still trying to please at the expense of my peace? What would my life look like if I stopped apologizing for my needs? Because when you say no from the center of your being, you're not pushing others away. You're calling your soul home. Stay with me, because in the final chapter, we'll explore the deepest integration of all, the inner marriage, the sacred union of your strength and softness, your rational mind and wild heart. The moment you no longer seek completion outside because you found it within. Part 10, the inner marriage, wholeness beyond roles, romance, and recognition. What if the love you've been searching for in relationships, in achievements, in praise, has always been a symbol for something deeper? What if every unmet longing, every failed connection, every restless craving was never about another person at all, but about the part of you that still waits to be seen, embraced, integrated? Carl Jung believed that the final stage of true individuation is not found in finding your soulmate, but in becoming whole within yourself. This is what he called the inner marriage. In Jungian psychology, the human psyche contains both masculine and feminine energies, the animus and anima, regardless of gender. These are not literal gender roles, but symbolic forces. The animus represents logic, structure, action. The anima, feeling, intuition, creativity. When these aspects are undeveloped or split off, we project them onto others. We fall in love not with people, but with our disowned selves. And yet, when we begin to reclaim these inner parts, something miraculous happens. We stop needing others to complete us. We begin to contain ourselves. For women over 35, this realization can feel like both a grief and a liberation. Grief because the fairy tales we were fed, that someone would save us, complete us, make it all okay, begin to unravel, but liberation because what replaces it is not disappointment. It's sovereignty. You stop waiting, you stop searching, you turn inward and find the union you've been seeking was never in someone else's arms, it was always in your own. There's a story I cherish. A woman in her 50s, never married, no children, was once asked if she regretted it. She smiled and said, "No. I've had 100 love stories, all of them inside me. I've spent years marrying pieces of myself I once gave away." She had traveled the world, danced alone in moonlight, painted her dreams onto canvas. She wasn't lonely. She was full. She had learned the sacred art of inner union. This is not about rejecting relationship. It's about transforming it. When you are internally divided, relationships become a battlefield of projection. You chase what you lack and resent what you depend on. But when you are internally united, relationships become a mirror of your wholeness, a place of mutual growth, not survival. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." The most transformative relationships are not based on need. They are based on resonance. To begin this inner marriage, you must court yourself, not just the parts that perform well, but the messy, moody, wild, brilliant parts you were taught to suppress. You must ask, where have I abandoned my softness to feel strong? Where have I denied my power to be loved? Where have I separated my intuition from my intellect? These are the vows, not promises to be perfect, but to be complete. The feminine within you longs to be honored, not as someone who serves, but as someone who sees. The masculine within you longs to support, not as someone who controls, but as someone who protects. When they meet inside you, when your feeling and your focus, your heart and your backbone, your fire and your stillness are allowed to dance, you become a woman who no longer seeks permission to exist. You simply are. This is the archetype of the wise woman, the inner Sophia, the sacred psyche, the mythic Hecate standing at the crossroads. She belongs to no one because she belongs to herself. She is the woman who says no without fear, who says yes without guilt, who does not need to be needed to feel worthy. She is not found in youth or beauty or status. She is found in the mirror of your own eyes, when you finally say, "I see you, I love you, I will never abandon you again." So ask yourself now, what part of me have I been waiting for someone else to love? And what would happen if I became the one who loved her first? This is the gift of midlife, not decline, not disappearance, but the return to yourself. And if you've made it here, then you already know the journey was never about becoming someone else. It was always about remembering who you truly are.